be with you all. Might begin this morning with a little bit of a sales pitch, I guess. You can see the apparatus we have here with the wooden stand and a projector and trying to use a whiteboard for a screen. Be nice if we had a screen that dropped down behind us and projector mounted up in the ceiling. I would volunteer to take it out of my salary, but last I checked there wasn't one, so. Anyway, I don't have a nice PowerPoint put together for you or a slideshow or anything like that, but I'm going to be reading some stories this morning to start that, to the best of my knowledge, are true. As close as I can tell, these stories are all true. And if Daniel's, I think we're back in Living Hope still when I preach this at Living Hope. It's not the exact same message, but very similar. So the Weaver children might remember this. And I don't really have a title for the message. I just call it the Sermon on the Tongue, I guess. I'm not sure what else to call it. But I'm going to begin, so you get this thing fired up. Kenneth, if you could turn off the lights back there. Hopefully, you can at least somewhat see that. I think it's big enough we ought to be able to. But I'm going to begin by reading a story about Wojtek the bear. And Wojtek is spelled W-O-J-T-E-K, but the J is silent, so it's Wojtek. English language is an interesting language. You know, some letters make one sound in one word and another sound in another word. And some words are completely silent. So anyway, Wojtek the bear. And these are actual pictures of the characters that I'm going to be reading about. It says, animal mascots were fairly common during World War II, but there are few military units who can say that they served alongside a brown bear. It's a rather unique claim to fame, but one of the troops of the Polish Second Corps can boast about that, thanks to their furry comrade, Wojtek. In the spring of 1942, the newly formed Anders Army left the Soviet Union after being released from a Siberian gulag and traveled to Iran, accompanied by thousands of Polish civilians who had been deported to Russia following the Soviet invasion of eastern Poland. On April 8th, the Polish soldiers encountered a young boy at a railroad station in Hamadan, Iran. He had in his possession a Syrian brown bear, a cub whose mother had been killed by hunters. One of the civilian refugees, 18-year-old Irina, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, grew attached to the creature and prompted a lieutenant to buy it. The bear was purchased for some Persian coins, a Swiss Army knife, and a tin of beef, and a portion of chocolate. The bear cub spent the next 3 months in a Polish refugee camp that had been set up near Tehran under the principal care of Irina. He is said to have caused trouble, eating any food that was lying around and allegedly stealing an entire clothesline of clothes. The bear was donated to the Polish 2nd Transport Company, later called the 22nd Artillery Support Company, and named Wojtek. While with the unit, he traveled across the Middle East, moving from Iraq into Syria, Palestine, and finally Egypt. Wojtek initially had problems swallowing and thus was fed condensed milk from old vodka bottles covered with rags. As he grew up, he was given marmalade, fruit, syrup, and honey. Just like the soldiers around him, he started off his morning drinking coffee, and he frequently smoked and ate cigarettes. The Polish troops accepted Wojtek as one of their own. He slept with them on cold nights and often participated in wrestling and soccer matches. And I'll show you a picture of that later. He was taught to salute when greeted, chase the oranges the units used during grenade training, and played pranks on the new recruits by holding them upside down and making them think he was going to eat them. However, Wojtek didn't think all the rules applied to him. During one Christmas, he snuck into the stores and ate the food, and he learned how to turn on the communal showers on his own, resulting in an odd water shortage. After arriving in Egypt, the Polish Corps was reassigned to fight alongside the British 8th Army during the Italian campaign. However, British regulations forbade pets and animal mascots from boarding transport ships, meaning the Poles wouldn't be able to bring Wojtek along. To bypass this policy, the 2nd Corps enlisted him as a soldier in the 22nd Company and gave him the rank of a private. As an enlisted soldier, he was given his own pay book and serial number and was allowed to live with the other troops in tents or a special wooden crate. Wojtek was present in the Battle of the Monte Cassino in 1944, where he is credited with helping move crates of ammunition, an effort for which he was promoted to rank of corporal. There are some who disregard this tale as fiction, but at least one account exists. A British soldier recalled seeing a bear mimicking the troops, and it was able to lift boxes that would normally require 4 men. His actions in Italy made Wojtek a celebrity among the Allied forces. In recognition of his popularity, the 22nd Company made their official emblem an image of a bear carrying an artillery shell. Not wanting Wojtek to be sent to Poland out of fear the Soviet-controlled government would make him a symbol of communism, his caretaker sent him to Scotland. He was transported along with the rest of the 22nd Company and stationed with them in the Winfield Airfield and Sunwick Farm near the village of Hutton. On November 15, 1947, following his demobilization, Wojtek was sent to live in the Edinburgh Zoo, where he lived out the remainder of his days. Wojtek died in December of 1963 at the age of 21. The cause for the bear was partially attributed to the damage to his esophagus, likely the result of his cigarette smoking during the war. In his memory, a bronze statue was unveiled in central Edinburgh in November 2015. Sounds like a tall tale, but again, as close as I can tell, it's actually factual. It's a picture of Wojtek with his soldier buddies. And this is him wrestling with the soldiers. I think that's the last picture. Oh, and then there's the bronze statue that they made to honor Wojtek. So the next story is about a lion. It says Christian, this was a lion's name, was born in a zoo in August of 1969. He was part of a litter that had been rejected by their mother. The litter was hand-reared by the zookeepers, but when Christian and his sisters were a few months old, they were sold to Harrods, a prestigious department store in London. John Rendall and Ace Bork had just come over from Australia and were working in London at an antique pine furniture shop called the Sophisticat. While they were exploring London, they visited Harrods and saw this small lion cub in the window. With no further thought, they bought the cub and took him home to their flat in Chelsea. I guess a flat is what you call a home in Australia? Not sure. But that's a picture of these men with their lion. They named the cub Christian as an irony of the Christians being fed to lions. They made a home for Christian in the basement of the antique shop, and they lived above the shop. Both having grown up with pets, John and Ace looked after Christian and treated him as a giant pet, part of the family. Walks in the local were a daily occurrence. Christian had a gentle temperament, but as all babies do, Christian started to get bigger and was becoming more difficult to control. One day, Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers by chance visited the Sophisticat antique shop and saw Christian. They were enchanted by Christian and suggested that Ace and John contact George Adamson to rehabilitate Christian back into the wild. Ace and John hadn't actually thought of this option, but knew that as a fully grown lion, Christian wouldn't be able to stay in London. So they contacted George Adamson, who put the wheels in motion with Kenyan Wildlife Services to introduce Christian to Africa. It took months for the bureaucratic wheels to turn in Kenya for permission to be granted, allowing Christian to travel there. In the meantime, Ace and John gave up their jobs in London and moved into a caravan out in the countryside. Here there was more space for Christian to exercise and to move around in. There was a lot of work needed to be done to get the nearly one-year-old Christian ready for the wilds of Africa. As on arrival to the English countryside, he was even scared of a scarecrow and showed very little aggression. Virginia and Bill built a large compound on their grounds for Christian. This was the closest he had ever been to the wilds. Christian settled down well and seemed to enjoy being outside investigating the surroundings. Ace and John knew that these times with Christian were special and maybe to last, so they wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. Christian's lion instincts were surfacing, but after 4 months of constant attention with Ace and John, a strong bond was being forged. As Ace says in an interview, he was dependent on us, but he also loved us as we were the closest things to him. After a long flight, Christian still had to travel another 200 miles in the African bush to finally arrive at the Kora Nature Reserve. It must have been such a shock for Christian to suddenly find himself in a different environment. Ace and John traveled with him to Kenya. His first encounter with hippos and crocodiles produced no aggression in Christian, just mild interest. John and Ace were appearing relaxed, but the reality was they had a London lion in Africa. His background put Christian at risk in the wilds. Other challenges were meeting George's man-made pride of lions and eventually wild lions who were not too pleased for another male to enter their territory. George saw that Christian had natural instincts but was extremely inexperienced in his environment. His first year in Kenya was anything but easy. There was a lot to learn. A year after leaving Christian at Kora in 1971, Ace and John returned to visit him against a lot of advice that it would be a wasted trip. They were very unsure. Anyway, this is a photo of them riding around town before they took him back to the African wilds. Ace and John and Christian. They were very unsure what the reception would be when they encountered Christian again, and of course it could be very dangerous. After an anxious time, Ace and John traveled into what had then become Christian's territory. George appeared on top of the hill about 100 meters away with Christian right behind him. Christian stopped and took a long, hard stare at the two men. Taking his time, he slowly ambled down the hill toward the men. The men, no longer able to bear the anticipation and tension, eventually called out his name. Christian came bounding towards them and jumped into their arms. This is an actual photo showing heartfelt recognition and a joyous reunion. He had not only recognized them, but was excited to see the men again. In June 1972, Ace and John embarked on another journey to Kenya, hoping to see Christian, now 3 years old. Again, George had warned them that Christian might not even come to camp, but after 3 days of waiting, Christian made his way back to camp. This time he was very different from the time before. He was much bigger and had matured. He was far more dignified and no longer boisterous in his greeting, but had not lost any of his charisma. He would sit with the men for a short while, then just get up and move away. Christian was no longer a pet, but a full-grown lion. However, on the last night of Ace and John's visit, the men sat up all night laughing and joking, with Christian playing just as he used to as a London lion. Come morning, though, Christian left to rejoin the other lions, and they never saw him again. It was a success. He was no longer dependent on the two men. He had become an African lion. Our next story is about an alligator. This is not his owner. We'll see his owner later. This is a shorter story. I'll try to get through here fairly quickly. It says, meet Rambo, a gentle alligator whose Florida owner says he eats at the dinner table and sleeps in my bed and follows me around like my dogs. But now his owner, 55-year-old Mary Thorne, is fighting to keep him since she was recently denied a permit for the gator, for the 125-pound gator. Thorne told ABC News today that she's had a permit to keep the 15-year-old gator ever since she rescued him and brought him home more than 7 years ago, when Rambo was just a little over a foot long. However, the gator has since grown to be over 6 feet long, and recently added condition for a permit says that gators over 6 feet need to be kept on a property with at least 2.5 acres of land, according to Florida Fish and Wildlife spokesman Gary Morse. This is a very complex case, especially since she acquired the gator before some changes in permit conditions, Morse told ABC News. He explained that Thorne had reapplied for a permit earlier this year and was originally denied, but a number of issues have since been raised, so the case is now in the process of being reviewed. And how that was concluded, I'm not even sure. I didn't look it up. Meanwhile, Thorne still has Rambo and is rallying community support for the gator she calls her second son. She explained that Rambo is a local celebrity and then the star of small shows. Thorne has put on for a few charities and organizations in her area. The trained gator has been photographed riding an ATV, and this is him at a desk, I guess, Rambo, and this is him driving a car, and that's him dressed up, along with her on a motorcycle. He's not a normal gator, Thorne said. He doesn't bite, and when I first got him, I trained him to keep his snout tight shut whenever people are around, especially children. Thorne added that Rambo loves being pet, and you can pet his mouth and neck, but he won't dare snap at you. The gator also often wears clothes, but not just to look cute, Thorne explained. She said she was told Rambo had originally been trapped in a small tank in a dark closet without sunlight before she rescued him, so he has to wear clothes when he goes outdoors because his skin is very sensitive to sunlight. The self-proclaimed Gator Mama said she doesn't believe in taking wild alligators from their natural habitat, but because Rambo had come to her under unique conditions, he needs to stay domesticated. And this is a quote-unquote Gator Mama. Hopefully you can tell which one's the gator there. He's too weak, and if he's put out in the wild or in place with the other gators, they'll kill him, she said. He's also scared of outdoor noises, and he's just used to being home with me. This is where he's been his whole life, and he's attached to me. Thorne added that Rambo plays with other dogs at home, goes to the fridge when he's hungry, and even watches TV with her on the couch. He's my best friend, my second son, she said. I don't want to lose him. So that's the story of Wotek the bear, Christian the lion, and Rambo the alligator. And that's the end of my pictures, end of my slideshow, I guess. So if you want, Kenneth, you can turn the lights back on. But a brown bear has 42 teeth. Its bite is 975 pounds per square inches. That's enough to crack a bowling ball or a whale skull. It can weigh up to 975 pounds. A brown bear can run up to 35 miles an hour, grow up to 7 feet tall, but can only jump 4 feet high. Its paws, if you think of its paws being your hand, can measure 8 to 14 inches across, and its claws are 3 to 5 inches long. The force of its paws, like if this brown bear hits you, the force can be up to 25,000 pounds. A brown bear can live to be 20 to 30 years old. An alligator weighs 200 to 500 pounds. It has 80 teeth. An alligator's jaw has a bite force of 2,125 pounds per square inch, which can easily crush a human skull. A 6-foot gator can literally bite your arm off. On dry land, an alligator can run up to 35 miles an hour for short distance, and in water, it can swim up to 20 miles an hour. Its tail is so strong that it can propel its entire body 5 feet out of the water. Alligators live to be up to 50 years old in the wild and 60 to 80 years old in captivity. A male lion has 30 teeth. Some of them are up to 4 inches long. Lions have a bite up to 1,000 pounds per square inch. Its paws can be up to 6 inches wide. Its claws are extremely sharp and can reach lengths up to 1.5 inches. The force of a lion's slap is up to 27,000 pounds. It can run up to 50 miles an hour, jump 36 feet laterally and 12 feet vertically. You can hear a lion roar up to 5 miles away. A male lion can live to be 8 to 10 years old. A human has 32 teeth. The force of a human bite is around 70 pounds per square inch. A human's tongue is made up mostly of muscles. The length of a tongue is between 3 and 4 inches long. It weighs around 2.4 ounces. A man by the name of Thomas Blackthorne set the world record by putting a ring through his tongue and lifting 27 pounds, 8.96 ounces. A tongue can live to be over 100 years old. Which one of these would you say is the biggest threat? A lion, a bear, an alligator, or the human tongue? If you want to turn to James chapter 3, that's where we're going to be spending our time today. In verses 2 to 12, and I'll be going through this in a way, they call it an expository fashion, just going verse by verse or taking several verses at a time, and then just preaching out of those verses. So James chapter 3, verses 2 through 12. It says, "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. I don't know how you all find it, but I sometimes I need to apologize for what I do. But I more frequently than that need to apologize for what I say. So I need to apologize for what I say more frequently than what I do. And this past weekend, a week ago, over the weekend, most of you were in Pennsylvania, we did John's chores. Gathered their eggs for them, did the chicken chores. And some of you have done their chores for them, and most of you have probably seen how their egg collection system works. So it's a belt that comes through the wall. There's a hole in the wall, and then a belt comes through the wall, probably, 3-4 feet, and then it circles around and goes back into the barn again. And then at the end of this belt, there's a chain that takes the eggs. This belt pushes the eggs up to the chain, and the chain takes the eggs over to the stacker arm, and then the stacker arm takes 6 eggs at a time, up and down, and stacks them into crates. And then on the other side of the stacker arm, there's all these empty crates, egg crates. And then there's a chain underneath the egg crates that takes the crates underneath the stacker arm down to another belt. That belt goes in this direction, and then it makes a 90-degree turn toward the stacker, and then it goes into the crate stacker, and then it stacks 6 crates at a time, and then it goes from that belt to where you hand stack them. So I'm sure if you're accustomed to running this machine, there's nothing to it. But if you're not accustomed to running this thing and something goes wrong, as you can imagine, there's a belt here, a chain here, a stacker arm, another chain, crates, another belt, another stacker, another belt. So if something goes wrong over here, it's going to cause a chain reaction all the way back to the belt that goes through the wall. And so if something does go wrong and you don't get the jam cleared relatively quickly, you're going to have the jam there's the chain reaction. There's 3 things you need to shut off. You need to shut off this belt, and you need to shut off the stacker, and you need to shut off the belt that comes through the wall. And I think if there's a way to mess things up, we pretty much figured it out last weekend. There's somehow a crate full of eggs. It's got underneath, if you think, this isn't the egg stacker, but it's the stacker that stacks the crates. And there's these little arms, this little apparatus that just lifts them up, drops down, another crate comes in, lifts that crate up, drops down, another crate comes in. Somehow, a crate full of eggs got underneath that stacker arm, and it came down perfectly on top of 6 eggs and just crushed 6 eggs. And the crate was stuck. So I had to go and lift the guard off the stacker in order to clear the jam. So I lift this guard off the stacker, I flip it backwards, and there's another, I should have seen it, but I didn't. There's another crate of eggs on the belt behind the stacker, and I lift this lid up of this guard up, and wouldn't you know it, this thing goes back and just hits 6 eggs perfectly, so just breaks them all. And that's just one instance. And so every day it seemed like every time we gathered eggs, there was something going wrong because we were rookies. Needless to say, we had some earnest conversations in the process, mostly due to myself. But anyway, we were at an air show last summer, in June, I believe it was, down in Davenport. And when we got there, one of the first things we saw that there was helicopter rides. And so I noticed there was a long line. And so I went up, and the kids wanted to have a helicopter ride, and I was a little bit, I wasn't too sure about it. I saw the long line. So I went up and asked them, I said, how long does it take to get a chopper ride? And they said, oh, about an hour. I said, okay, we can wait an hour. So we bought the tickets, and the tickets are non-refundable, big letters, non-refundable. And there's a reason for that later, we discover later. So we buy the tickets, we go to the end of the line, expecting to wait about an hour. Well, as we're waiting, I get out my phone and I'm timing the rides. How long does it take from the time this chopper takes off to the time it lands again? And it's about 6 minutes. And I see, they're taking what? 3 people at the most per ride. And some of these people, there's people that are together and there's people that are by themselves. So not every ride is full. And there's this long line in front of us. And I soon realized that there is no way that we're going to get a chopper ride within an hour. Because I started doing the math. It's simple math, right? 6 minutes per ride. How many people's in front of us? There's no way. So there we are. We stand in this line. An hour goes by. Soon another hour goes by. And we have made little progress. And it's hot. I mean, it's a warm day, direct sunlight. We didn't come prepared to stand in the sun for, at the same spot for hours. You can't leave your space in line or you're going to lose it. Anyway, soon they started flying fighter jets. They were doing their displays with their fighter jets, so every time they would fly a big jet like that, they would have to shut everything else down, so the choppers couldn't fly. So now we weren't only waiting in line, but now we had to wait while they did these different parts of the show. So this just drags on and on, hour after hour, and needless to say, we were hot and we were bothered. And I finally decided and in the meantime, to top it all off, in the meantime, they keep selling tickets. And I keep hearing them tell people, oh, it'll be about an hour. So now I know they're blatantly lying to these people, telling it's going to be about an hour, knowing full well that we've been in that line for hours. And finally I had enough. They shut it down again. We were getting closer towards our turn. But they shut it down again because they were taking F-22, I think it was, one of the latest model of fighter jet to do his maneuvers. And it was going to be at least a half an hour or more before we could get back in line to wait our turn for a ride. And so I'd had enough, and I let them know that I'd had enough. And honestly, I should have said more than I did, but I should have said it in a different fashion. They knew I was frustrated. I didn't hide the fact that I was frustrated. In some cases, it's okay to say something, right? And I think this was one of them. They were telling people it takes an hour. We were there for hours, and we still hadn't had our ride. They're still telling people it takes an hour. They're shutting this thing down. It's dragging on and on and on. We're standing in the hot sun, trying to stay hydrated. So I don't think it was out of line to say something, but it probably could have said it in a nicer way than I did. And afterwards, I regretted the way in which I said what I said. I didn't really say anything out of line. I just let them know it's ridiculous that we're standing in line this long. You told us an hour, and now we're 4 hours into this thing. Anyway, so I said my piece to this guy, and then when they shut back up, they obviously took it to heart because all of a sudden these 6-minute rides went down to 3.5 minutes. It was 3.5 minutes from the time the chopper lifted till the chopper landed again. And so we ended up waiting in line for over 4 hours for a 3.5-minute chopper ride, which was extremely frustrating. And there was a guy from the local news media there, and he kept coming up to us and talking with us, and he just couldn't believe it took this long. He said, hey, he's gonna, in his article the next day, he'll make sure people know. Well, his article basically said long waits for helicopter rides. So I was a little bit disappointed he didn't say more. But anyway, point being, it wasn't what I said, it was how I said it. If you want to know how to say something diplomatically, you talk with Daniel. Daniel likes his barbecue, as most of us do, right? But one thing you don't want to do is sell Daniel bad barbecue. If you have a smokehouse and Daniel comes in and he buys barbecue and it's a bad day for you, then Daniel is going to nicely let you know that you didn't do the best in his barbecue and kindly ask if you wouldn't consider replacing it. But he's not going to come in and tell you to get rid of your smoker and go get a job. You stink at smoking meat, right? So there's a way to do these things. So maybe Daniel ought to do a class for us. All this to say, if I preach this message without acknowledging my tendency to speak too quickly and say too much, I would be a hypocrite. I literally would be a hypocrite. And I guess if you want to know more, you can talk to my family. But anyway, verse 2 says, "For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body." So this word stumble, I think the King James translation would say offend. The Greek translation of this word, if you look in the original language, it's offend, stumble, or cause to stumble. So essentially, James is saying that if we have learned to control, if we don't stumble in word, if we have learned how to not be an offense to someone, how to not be a stumbling block to someone with our tongue, we have become a perfect, or what he was saying, this word perfect actually means mature. We've become a perfect or mature man. How well we can handle our tongue can tell us to an extent what our level of spiritual maturity is. Verse 3 says, "Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body." What makes a bridle a bridle? If you know anything about horses, you know, and you've put a bridle on a horse and a halter on a horse, you know what the difference is. The difference between a halter and a bridle is a bit. A bridle has a bit, a halter doesn't. With a halter, you can guide the horse. You can lead a horse with a halter, but if that horse decides not to cooperate, there's really not much you'll be able to do about it. But if you have a bridle, well, I want to share. So my Uncle Lester was a bit of a horseman, I guess, back in the day. And so he would drive, as most horsemen do, he would take his horses out for a drive. One day, he was out driving one of his horses, and if you've ever driven a horse, you know that what it is when a horse can get up into the lines, right? They start pulling on the reins, and you got to lean back, and you pull, and you pull, you just kind of put your weight in there, and the harder this horse pulls on the reins, the harder you have to pull on the reins to keep him under control. Well, this was that type of a horse. So there was a lot of pressure on these reins. So he's pulling back, and all of a sudden, the reins just come back like that. And what had happened was the bit broke. There was so much pressure that the bit broke. Well, obviously, instantly the horse starts to speed up, and he kept speeding up until he was completely out of control. So what do? You're driving this horse, the bit breaks, the reins are completely useless, you're going down a main highway, I think it was Highway 528 maybe if I'm not mistaken. What are you going to do? Jump off? At this point you're probably, I don't know how fast a horse runs, 30 mile an hour? Maybe, somewhere in that range. You're going probably close to 30 mile an hour. If you jump off, a good chance you're going to get seriously injured or killed. Well, and if you just stay along for the ride, who knows what's going to happen? Run in front of a truck? So Lester, he gets up out of his cart seat, goes to the front of the cart, and he gets up on the front. He stands up, he crawls up on the front part of the cart, and just kind of leapt onto the horse's back and got a hold of the horse's back by the harness. And he starts crawling up over his back while this horse is running full speed. I'm not sure if he was still in stride or if he was galloping. But he crawled up over the horse's back, got up to the back of his neck, reached around, got a hold of this bitless bridle, but he reached around and got hold of both sides and pulled his head back and was able to pull his head all the way back till he had him under control. So a bridle without a bit is practically useless. But how does a bit function? If you know anything about a bit goes into the horse's mouth, and then the reins attach to the bit. And the tighter that you pull on these reins, the tighter that bit is going to clamp, which creates pressure on the horse's mouth, and so the horse is going to submit. You can control the horse if you have a bit through his mouth. You control his whole body. So if you were to paraphrase what verse 3 is saying, it's essentially saying that if we have learned to control our mouths, then in turn, we also ought to be able to control the rest of our body because we've learned to control the most unruly member of our body, which is the tongue, which is our mouth. Verse 4 says, "Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, They are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. There's a merchant ship called the Irina class. I believe it's the biggest merchant ship that was ever made, and it might still be in service, I'm not sure. But it's 1,312 feet long and 201 feet wide. So if you imagine this big merchant ship out on a body of water, whether it's the Great Lakes or an ocean somewhere, probably used on the Great Lakes, I'm guessing, that is a lot of surface for the wind to catch. So the wind is going to have a lot of force on the side of that ship, or even the front of that ship. Without a steering system, without a rudder, that ship is going to be driven by the wind until it splits in two or crashes into a bank somewhere. But if you've got a rudder, a steering system, you can dictate which way this ship turns. And a rudder is very small in proportion to the size of the ship, but yet you can steer the ship with that rudder. Our tongue is very small in proportion to our bodies. Our tongue is very small in proportion to the church here, to our communities, to our families. Yet our tongue can set the direction of each one of those. You know, we've all likely said things to our families that were potentially damaging. But in the heat of the moment, we say it anyways. For us men, we've probably all been in, and at some point in our lives, we've been involved in church meetings, brothers' meetings, whether it was here or Living Hope or back when we were at the Amish, where the stakes were high and tensions were high. And it's at that moment that our tongues have the potential to steer the direction of the church in one way or another. We may have had to have a critical conversation with a member of the local community. If we fail to control our tongue in that instance, and that member goes and relays his experience with someone else from the local community, that's going to shape their perspective of the church in the community, and thereby set the direction of the church in the local community. That's the power that the tongue has. Like the rudder of a ship, it sets the direction of all of those things. Verse 5, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. There was a U.S. Forest Service fire spotter. Her job was to spot fires by the name of Terry Barton. It's a true story. She and her husband were separated because they were having marriage problems. And Terry's husband sends her a letter. And Terry gets this letter. She reads the letter. And whatever her husband wrote, I'm not sure what the contents were of that letter, whatever her husband wrote made her so upset that instead of just tearing the letter up, throwing it in the trash, there wasn't enough for her. She decides to take this letter and burn it. And during that time, there was what was called a red flag warning against burning. We get burn warnings out here too sometimes because of high temperatures, dry conditions, and wind. Well, there was a red flag warning during that time because of those things. There was low humidity, it was extremely dry, it was extremely windy, prime conditions for a fire to just spread and become a monster. She takes this letter out behind her house, puts it in her fire ring, and lights it. And apparently she didn't, I don't know, maybe she was watching it, just got out of control. At any rate, this thing gets out of control outside the fire ring, spreads rapidly, and turns into a massive wildfire. This fire burned 138,000 acres, destroyed 600 structures, including 132 homes. It triggered evacuations of 5,300 residents and resulted in the death of 6 people. It cost $39 million to suppress the fire, and it destroyed over $40 million of private property. As a result, Terry was sentenced to 15 years of probation and ordered to pay $42 million in restitution. After 15 years, the probation office filed a complaint because she had only paid $15,000 of the $42 million that she owed, so she was sentenced to another 15 years. She was paying $150 a month toward her restitution. So if you do the math, $42 million, I believe, divided by 150 is like, it's 23,334 years it would have taken her to pay back that restitution. So despite all of her knowledge with wildfires, again, this was a fire spotter. She knew probably about everything there was to know about wildfires. Despite all of that knowledge, the words that her husband wrote caused an emotional reaction in her so severe that she disregarded everything she knew, and the result was this wildfire. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindleth. What do we do when we want to know what God says, right? We pick up the Bible and we read it. We believe that reading the Bible is a form of God speaking to us. So the written, what we write, is also our word. The written word is also our tongue. We see the power that the news media has had in the past, and maybe still does to some extent, to move the masses through what they say. There was a period of time when the media, they had a firm grip on society. All the news was channeled through all the news was channeled through a few channels. There wasn't as many methods of getting the news out to people as there are today. So they had a stranglehold on what got out to people. They went through their filters. So if they were biased in a specific way, that's the way they presented the news. So what they would do is they would say, for example, I'll give you one example, is they would use words like black man is shot by a white police officer. They would use that type of wording to stoke racial tensions. And through their words, the written word or otherwise, they were able to manipulate people mentally to where they would ignore the facts and they could whip them into emotional frenzy just by the words that they use. Again, printed word or otherwise. And for a period of time, America was literally set on fire through protests, and you could say that the direction of the country was altered through the power of the tongue, written and spoken. It's more intimidating, like if I'm talking with you face to face, it's going to be a bit more intimidating for me to say something that's controversial. But we are no longer a society that just communicates in person. We're no longer a society that just communicates face to face. We now have digital communication, whether that's email, text, audio. There's many forms of digital communication, and social media is one of them. Through social media, you have the ability to publicly display your tongue, if you will, for the world to see. Like if you post something on social media, someone across the world, Australia, China, can instantly see what you post and what you comment, or if you comment on someone else's post. Instantly they're able to see that. So digital communication has given people the ability to hide behind their keyboards, right? If you're behind your keyboard, you're just using your phone or whatever, you don't have to show your face. So people can hide behind a keyboard and publicly give somebody, whether it's someone they know or not, they may not even know this individual personally, but they can give this person a public verbal thrashing through digital communication. And the worst part about this is, I would say the worst part about this is that the tongues of thousands of professing Christians have been put on public display for the world to see, and when our online behavior doesn't reflect the regenerate heart, then the name of Christ is smeared. Verse 6, it says, "A tongue is a fire, a whirl of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell." What I want to look at is his word nature here in verse 6. Again, the translation on the original language for the word nature is origin, lineage, or birth. If we look at Matthew chapter 1, this same word, the word nature here in verse 6, the exact same Greek word is used in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, where it says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham. And then it goes down and gives you the entire genealogy of Jesus Christ. So if I was to interpret verse 6, I would say that it is saying that the tongue is so set among the members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of an entire genealogy. Our tongues have the potential to not only destroy our family we live with today, but our tongue has the potential to destroy future generations. Even your tongue has the potential to destroy generations of people, of your descendants, whom you will never meet. Because things like verbal abuse can become what's called a generational sin, where it's passed down from generation to generation. And if my children, for example, leave the faith as a result of my tongue, what are the odds that their children will come to the faith? It's not very high. Odds are they won't. And if that happens, at that point, my tongue has set on fire the course of multiple generations. It has set on fire the course of a genealogy. I believe that's what verse 6 is saying. Verses 7 and 8 says, for every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. Every kind of beast, bird, reptile, creature of the sea has been tamed and been tamed by mankind. We saw this morning, a bear has been tamed, a lion's been tamed, an alligator has been tamed, but it's saying that no man can tame the tongue. Now this verse is doing more than just making the statement that no man can tame the tongue and just leaving it at that. The intention of this verse is to point us to who can tame the tongue, which is obviously God through the Holy Spirit. And to us as Christians, that seems a bit cliche, right? Yeah, we're guided by the Holy Spirit, God through the Holy Spirit. But it shouldn't be a cliche to us. That should be real to us, that our tongue can be controlled by God through the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit can be the bit in our mouths. Verse 9 says, with it, with the tongue, we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude or the image of God. So with it we bless God, and with it we curse God's creation. We curse man. What do you think of someone, what do you think when you think of someone cursing man? Do you picture somebody just railing on someone, just basically cussing them out? You might say, is that what you imagine when you think of someone cursing God's creation, cursing man? I think we need to, if that's the picture we get in our heads, I think we need to dig deeper. Actually, I know we need to dig deeper. Because a sub-definition of cursing is an offensive word or phrase used to express anger or annoyance. So have we ever been guilty of using an offensive word or phrase to express our anger or annoyance at someone or about someone that didn't include a curse word? We probably have. So that can be a form of us cursing God's creation, of us cursing man. Gossip would fall under this cursing category. And if you look at gossip, you dig a little bit deeper, what's included in gossip is what I could find is tittle-tattle, whispers, stories, tales, tidbits, scandal, hearsay, smear campaign, dirt, mudslimming, jaw, gas, chinwag, gabfest. We've all probably done one of those at one point in time, right? And if you look at what is the opposite of gossip is facts, is truth. I remember back when Linda Stoltzfus, most of us or all of us probably know the story of Linda Stoltzfus in Pennsylvania, the girl who was kidnapped, went missing, was murdered, and it took them several months to find her. During that time, from the time that she went missing to the time that that case was resolved, there were so many false reports coming out of the Mennonite and Amish communities that the authorities had to put out a public statement. They basically put out a public statement saying, it's enough of this, cut it out. Quit making stuff up, quit spreading these rumors. It's not true. Until we put it out there, you can know that it's not true, so stop it. And if you think it's pretty ridiculous, honestly, that the authorities had to put that statement out because of the things that the Amish and Mennonites were manufacturing and spreading as facts. So the Amish and Mennonites are known for their gossip. If you look at 1 Peter, I want to just read real quick 2 verses. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 and 22, it says, 1 Peter chapter 2, 21 and 22. Yeah. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Now when you think of deceit, what do you think of? Deceit being found in our mouth. Hopefully we can all say that we don't struggle with lying. And I tried to think of different examples of how could we, what could be deceit in our mouths. And one thing I guess that came to mind was, we've heard the saying that don't say something behind someone's back that you wouldn't say to their face. Well, how about we don't say something to someone's face that we wouldn't say behind their back? For example, I could say something about Eli, I could say something nice to Eli's face that I wouldn't say to Steve about Eli. So if what I say what the nice things I say to Eli's face, if I wouldn't say those nice things to Steve about Eli, then I shouldn't say them to Eli either, because at that point it's flattery. And flattery can be a form of deceit. Verses 10 and 11. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Have we ever seen a spring? It's just basically asking us a question. Have we ever seen a spring or well that produce both fresh water and bitter? It's impossible. If you mix fresh water with salt water, all you have is diluted salt water. James is saying that whatever we're producing is what's within us. We can know what we are within us by whatever we're producing. Verse 12 says, can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh. We can take a fig tree and call it a fig tree. We can prune a fig tree. We can take a fig tree and call it an olive tree. We can take a fig tree and prune it to look like an olive tree. We can transplant a fig tree into an olive grove, but it's still not going to produce olives. It's still not going to be an olive tree. We can label ourselves whatever it is that we want to label ourselves and make ourselves look like whatever it is that we want to look like, but what's coming out of our fountain, what's coming out of our mouth, what's coming out of our opening, as James puts it, tells us who and what we really are. Matthew chapter 12 says, but I say unto you that every idle word whatever men speak, they shall give account of it on the day of judgment. We're going to give account on the day of judgment for every idle word that we speak. For by your words you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. Why would we be justified or condemned? Why would we be judged by the words that we speak? There's more to it than just simply what we say. We're not being judged or justified just simply because of what we said. We're being judged or justified because what we said came from within. Our words are an overflow of our heart. Therefore, God can judge us by what we say. Psalm 141 says, set a watch, O Lord, before my mouth, and keep the door of my lips. In ancient prisons, soldiers would guard the prison in shifts. There would be 4 soldiers per shift. 2 at the door, 2 inside the prison. What did David mean when he said, set a watch over my mouth? I think this is a context in which he was making that request to God. He was telling God, set a night watch over my mouth, lest something escapes. I believe that's what David had in mind when he made that request to God. Proverbs 10 says, in the multitude of words sin is not lacking, but he who holds back his lips is wise. How many words does it take to make a multitude of words? Who's to say? But the doctrine of this verse is not difficult to understand. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. If we restrain our lips, we're wise. Proverbs chapter 18, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it shall eat the fruit of it. The English Standard Version says, those who love to talk will reap the consequences. So we will eat the fruit of our tongues, and we will reap the consequences for better or for worse. So what type of life and what type of death is in the power of the tongue? Physical death is in the power of the tongue. We talked about the wildfire that killed 6 people. So the tongue, our tongues can literally kill people. Our tongues can also speak life. Our tongues can save physical lives. Whatever our tongue is capable of doing physically, our tongue is also capable of doing spiritually. So we think about our tongue being able to save lives. Our tongue can also be a part of bringing spiritual life to someone. But in the same way that our tongue can kill someone physically, our tongue can kill others and ourselves spiritually. Our tongue, someone going to hell or us going to hell, can be the result of our tongue. So which do you believe poses the biggest threat? A brown bear, an alligator, a lion, or your own tongue? Let's kneel for prayer. Father, as we bring this service to a close, Lord, as we look into your word today, God, we see the warnings that you have to us about our tongues and how we use them. And as being an individual myself, God, who struggled with that, I know it's a real thing. And we just help us to realize the potential that our tongues have for good and for evil. We pray, Lord, that we would have a relationship with you in such a way that the Holy Spirit would have the power in our lives to be the bit in our mouths, to control our mouths, so that our tongues wouldn't be an offense, wouldn't be a stumbling block to others. Just speak to us, God, as we go throughout our days, as we might say things that we don't even think of as we say them, bring them to our attention. But most of all, God, give us the power through you to overcome. We just commit this service to you in Jesus' name. Amen. When I was down in the kitchen getting a drink of water just before I came up here, Laura Summy was down there putting rice in a casserole container, and I said, "Rice? You're gonna have rice today?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "How long does that take to make?" She said, "About an hour." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "You must be planning, what if I preach for 20 minutes? And she said, "Well, you can really," I forget her exact words, but she said, anyway, something to the extent of, "We can preach for an hour today." Well, I didn't quite get there, but I think I nearly pulled it off. Way too close. So sorry for being too long-winded, but it just took a bit of time to get through everything. I'll turn the time over to Kenneth.